have now pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges and are cooperating with the Justice Department's investigation.
I want to make two announcements. First, I'm announcing that the Southern District of New York has filed charges against Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, and Gary Wang, a co-founder of FTX, in connection with their roles in the frauds that contributed to FTX's collapse. Both Ms. Ellison and Mr. Wang have pled guilty to those charges.
The Justice Department made the announcement on December 22nd, the same day that Bankman-Fried waived extradition to the U.S. Bankman-Fried is now out of jail and back in his mom's basement as a result. The federal court set bail at $250 million, and Bankman-Fried was bonded out. Now, a bail bond is usually about 10% of the total bail amount, so he probably had to come up with around $25 million in assets. The court record shows that his parents will need to post equity interest in their home by January 12th, 2023. And this comes just weeks after Bankman-Fried told George Stephanopoulos that he only had about $100,000 left in his bank account. Now, the bail disposition said the two non-parent charities would also sign bonds for lesser amounts. The terms of the release require Bankman-Fried to surrender his passport, and he'll be confined to detention at his home in Palo Alto, California, where he will have to wear an ankle monitor. Bankman-Fried's parents co-signed the bond, and Bankman-Fried is barred from starting a business or operating new lines of credit more than $1,000 unless approved by the government or the court. The court records show that he'll need to undergo a mental health evaluation and may request to leave the house for exercise. Now, Caroline Ellison's unsigned plea agreement says that she admitted to 7 counts, including committing wire fraud on FTX customers and lenders of Alameda Research, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud and securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Now, the maximum sentence of incarceration on those counts is 110 years, but she's not going to face anything like that, especially because she's cooperating. But Ellison must continue to cooperate, or else she could be charged with other crimes. Ellison also agreed to the forfeiture charge, and the government says that it cannot agree not to prosecute her for tax fraud if those charges are appropriate. By pleading guilty, Ellison is not guaranteed a lighter sentence, but typically defendants who cooperate completely do get a lighter sentence. And the plea agreements also require her to make restitution. Ellison was released on bail but cannot leave the country. Wang pleaded guilty to 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud, commodities fraud, and securities fraud. The maximum sentence for those crimes is about 50 years in prison. Wang also agreed to restitution to his victims and agreed to the forfeiture. Now, the same cooperation terms apply to Wang, but he was also released on bail with the condition that he not leave the country. Both plea agreements included sections that are redacted so as not to tip off Bankman-Fried and other targets about specific information that Ellison and Wang shared with investigators. And in separate actions, the SEC charged Wang and Ellison with securities fraud, and the CFTC also filed fraud charges against Ellison and Wang. The CFTC's amended complaint against Bankman-Fried adds charges against Ellison and Wang for fraud and material representations in connection with the sale of digital asset commodities in interstate commerce. And the CFTC hit Wang for creating the code features in the FTX trading platform that allowed Alameda to have an unlimited credit line on FTX without being detected. And the CFTC complaint offers more details about what happened in November when crypto declined and FTX could not keep up with customer withdrawals. Publicly, Bankman-Fried claimed that there was just a liquidity problem, while privately, quote, Bankman-Fried, Ellison, and other key personnel at FTX and Alameda acknowledged internally that this shortfall was not merely a matter of having sufficient liquid assets on hand to cover customer withdrawals in the short term. Rather, FTX customer assets were irrevocably lost because Alameda had misappropriated them. The CFTC says that Bankman-Fried's infamous tweet threads of November 6th and 7th, the ones where he apologized for being a screw-up and accused Binance of trying to sabotage FTX, were workshopped ahead of time with Ellison, Wang, and other advisors. The CFTC says, quote, several individuals expressed concerns that Bankman-Fried's tweet was inaccurate and or misleading. And on November 9th, after Binance announced that it would acquire FTX in its entirety, Ellison held an all-hands meeting with employees of Alameda Research. During the meeting, she provided detailed information about the years-long fraud. Quote, Ellison stated that starting last year, Alameda was borrowing a bunch of money by open-term loans and used those assets to make very illiquid investments. Ellison further explained that following the widespread decline of digital asset prices, most of Alameda's loans had been recalled, and in order to meet
I take it this isn't a social
Alameda
call.
borrowed a bunch of funds from FTX.
Okay, I can deal with it.
Led to FTX having
There,
a shortfall.
you'll have a minute.
Ellison informed Alameda staff that FTX had always allowed Alameda to borrow customer assets and did not require collateral for those loans. She also explained that Alameda could access user assets without requiring FTX's approval, as the structure allowed Alameda to go negative in coins. In response to an employee question, Ellison also acknowledged that her November 6th tweet to the Binance CEO offering to buy his FTT holdings at $20 per token was kind of a misleading thing to tweet, and expressed remorse. Shortly after this meeting, most of Alameda's staff resigned. So basically, Caroline Ellison sort of admitted to, borrowing a bunch of money from FTX, being allowed to have, a negative balance, and that FTX and Alameda just kept moving stuff around until the bottom dropped out of the market, and then, what do you no, there's nothing left to borrow, and the customers couldn't withdraw their money. Classic Pisces. One day later, FTX and 133 related entities filed for bankruptcy. I declare bankruptcy! It was all, very cool, very progressive, very edgy until, it wasn't. Ellison and Wang do not contest the liability to these CFTC's claims, and their testimony makes it very hard for Bankman-Fried to claim that he didn't know what he was doing, and aw shucks, it was just a big mistake. Wang and Ellison also agreed to the entry of consent orders of judgment as to their liability for engaging in massive fraud. The SEC complaint against Wang and Ellison gives us more clues about how they were cooperating against Bankman-Fried. With respect to the fiat and FTX.com account, the SEC said that some of the bank accounts were not in Alameda's name, but rather the name of North Dimension Inc., an Alameda subsidiary. North Dimension's website does not disclose any connection to Alameda, but apparently Ellison knew that Bankman-Fried had directed FTX to have customers send funds to North Dimension in an effort to hide the fact that the funds were being sent to an account controlled by Alameda. Apparently, Alameda didn't segregate those customer funds, and the North Dimension account is actually the multi-billion-dollar debt referred to as the fiat at FTX.com account. The fiat at FTX account was then listed as a loan on the quarterly balance sheets. And Ellison, allegedly at Bankman-Fried's direction, combined this liability with loans Alameda had received from third-party lenders to obscure Alameda's intertwined financial relationship with FTX. Now, this information, if true, is fairly damning evidence of the defendant's intent to mislead and conceal information from investors, lenders, and customers. The complaint says in 2022, FTX started trying to separate Alameda's debt in the fiat at FTX.com account from the portion attributable to FTX. And when Alameda's portion was moved to a different account, it triggered a process that added interest to Alameda's debt. Quote, Bankman-Fried directed that the Alameda liability be moved to an account that would not be charged with interest. This account was associated with an individual that had no apparent connection to Alameda. As a result, this change had the effect of further concealing Alameda's liability in FTX's internal systems. And when crypto started crashing in May, causing Alameda's lenders to come calling, Bankman-Fried told Ellison to hide the unlimited line of credit on the balance sheet so that the lenders didn't know about it. And Ellison admitted to making statements that she knew were untrue. For example, in a Bloomberg article from September 2022, Bankman-Fried claimed that Alameda is a wholly separate entity than FTX, and in the same article, Ellison is quoted as stating about Alameda, quote, we're at arm's length, we don't get any different treatment from other market makers. And as for the technical issues, Wang designed the so-called risk engine that Bankman-Fried touted to investors. The SEC complaint notes that Bankman-Fried touted this risk protocol when he testified to Congress. Quote, there's a complete transparency about the positions that are held. There's a robust, consistent risk framework applied. Of course, one of the biggest problems is the risk engine didn't apply to FTX's biggest customer, Alameda Research. Wang knew this because he was the person who created the code exempting Alameda Research from the rules, and that Ellison was aware and took advantage of this special undisclosed benefit. Of course, this is just scratching the surface. There's additional juicy details about Alameda propping up the price of FTT, FTX using bots to manipulate the entire market, and then the employees and founders issuing giant loans to each other at the company's expense. Now, the SEC complaint alleges that Bankman-Fried violated two parts of the Securities Exchange Act of 1933, breach of Section 17A and 10B. Both of these